everyone, welcome to my channel. Welcome if you're new and welcome back if you are not new. So today I want to show you how to take a pattern and develop it even further. So throughout the weeks we have been looking at developing a botanical or modern botanical pattern. In this case it's this flower right here, and it's the pattern of the scales that are layering on top of each other and they go kind of up, right? So the same pattern can be seen in snake skin, for example, or fish scales, and then some botanical other plants and pine cones and things like that. So speaking of which, I'll show you this big humongous pine cone here in a second, but then I have shared how to develop your own style from looking at a realistic pattern, or it could be anything. Just take that same mentality and put it onto anything you do. So even if you don't do modern botanical art and you prefer something different like abstract or whatever, just developing your own style. In this case, it's an illustrative style, so it's a bit easier to talk about it in that sense than maybe perhaps other styles of art. But basically, developing a pattern means looking at the original and then extending, exaggerating, lengthening the pattern and or the segments and make it look different. You can also play with textures, you can play with different color palettes. All of that becomes very kind of individualized. So then the last time we spoke about the pattern is this gorgeous little botanical number I did here, where again I have focused on the segments being pointier, elongated and more rounder and larger, and then also I used watercolors to show how to create depth to those scales. So over the weekend we went to Ickworth House and they have lovely grounds there. There is a big old pine tree in front of the house, and this humongous pine cone was laying on the ground. It's a very rare thing to see a green pine cone dropped to the ground, because usually they need to be like, you know, dry, and then they just sort of fall off with the seeds coming out and the squirrels nibbling. But I have a suspicion that a squirrel must have done a little number here as well and kind of chewed it from the base perhaps. And so that's how it ended up on the ground. But like I said, it's very rare to have the opportunity to look at a green pine cone so close up, because usually they're high up on the tree and you know, you can just find pictures of them online. So of course I took this pine cone home. We have a lovely collection in the living room of all different pine cones. Whenever we go traveling around England, I always make sure I bring some beautiful pine cones. We have some gorgeous ones from Cornwall and Wales as well. Anyway, so here's some sticky syrup thing coming out of it, and I got my fingers all stuck in it over the weekend, so I'm making sure I'm holding it in a napkin or like a tissue thing. Having looked at this pattern, immediately it reminded me of that similar pattern that we have in the flower. But the point is, this pattern is so gorgeous, it's super hard, and it's got these spiky bits on the end. And yeah, I just love the structure of it. So I decided to study it further, and in connection with the pattern that I already studied before. Let me just put it down here. I used a number of different mixed media supplies here, and trying to bring texture in, because it's super textured, it's got lovely pattern. So when you look at these bits, there's every single segment has a little ridge or few ridges to them, and that's something I have added to the details of this pattern. So something that's a little bit more simpler in the sense that there's just different layers of watercolor, you can then take further and develop more kind of detail to it if you wish. So these sort of exercises I find very, very helpful because you learn a lot through taking something and then just developing it. So the supplies that I've used are Tombow water soluble markers. I've used some acrylic markers here, so both the Posca and the Molotov, and some watercolor pencils which are new, so I will share those with you. I just bought them in Koster and I was able to film a little vlog there, so that's coming I believe on Friday. So what we have here is a number of other things for this pattern. So what I did, I looked at this color palette and pattern and thought, how can I bring this into that? And so I started by drawing out a pattern that I'm familiar with from the botanical illustrations here, yet taking some of the elements of the structure from the Pinecone illustration and also adding fun. This is what I like about modern botanical art. It becomes about fun, exaggerating things, not seeing things as they are in front of you, but adding your own flair to it, adding your own personality, your own color palette, and essentially all of those things then develop you as an artist, develop your own style, make it easier for you to discover your own style. So let's have a closer look at the pattern right here. So what I've done is I showed you all the steps, how we get from here to there. So basically first step was using Tombow markers and just color blocking certain areas, looking at the Pinecone, seeing where there are darker areas and where there's textural elements like those ridges that I talked about, and using different colors to highlight them. Then the second step was adding water. Just by adding water, you can see we're moving quite a bit to a blended and watercolor effect. These techniques are great if you like watercolor but want to add a little bit of mixed media for that extra textural effect. Then the next step was to add some watercolor pencils. Again, that helps with a depth and texture and detail of the scales that we observed earlier. I also have used the acrylic markers here just to add some gold. I thought I can add some fun even here, even though the color palette maybe is not quite mine. I felt it was a little bit dull for my personal liking, so I still went into chartreuse and I tried to add little pops of color to just lift the whole thing. But later on, I realized I wanted to have a color palette that is more unique to my style. Then on the next one, after I've used a little bit of water to blend the watercolor pencils, I went for the colored pencils and just added again extra layer of detail. And what that does is the colored pencils can't be blended with water, so you can go more sharper with them. Speaking of which, I have then ended the illustration by adding the contrasting detail, which is the deepest value of it, and it just makes the whole thing pop. So if I finish the entire illustration like this, all of this would be popping, but I wanted just to show you where I started and how I developed the texture. Similarly, I have followed that thinking throughout this pattern and the coloring of it. So, but like I said before, I just changed up the colors slightly. I mean, you can see they're very similar to the previous colors. So these are all the colors I've used here, and these are the colors that I've used here. So the color palette is quite similar, except for what I've done here is I used more of the water soluble supplies, except for 2 pencils and a marker. Everything else was water soluble, whereas here we have some water soluble mixed media art supplies, but also quite a lot of dry pencil. So that creates a kind of deeper saturated look perhaps. So let me share the step-by-step and show you how I created both patterns. So to begin with, I simply started with Tombow markers. Now I have a bunch of Tombow markers right here, and I'll try to see. I think I used this one and these two colors and a new color, which I will share in the upcoming studio vlog on Friday. But I've used basically all of these items. So I'll put the pencils to a side right here. And let's see. So what I started with was just simply mimicking the shadows in a very simple manner. So it doesn't have to be precise because it will be blended later on. So let's see, what else do we have? So this marker I used to just create the ridges, and then we have two more colors which I used. So this is the lighter one to kind of just add a bit of color, and then this darker color I just used again for shadowing, like so, and that was it. The next step was to add a little bit of water and just maneuver it and blend it together, and as you will see, it makes a big difference right there. So you still have some detail to an extent, but it's definitely blended now. The next step I did was just waiting. So it's important to wait for the pattern or for the water to dry, but I will also add a bit of the marker into here because that's also will take a little while to dry. Next we have watercolor pencils. So here I've got 4 colors. These are all by Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils. I like this color palette right here. So what I did here, then I basically just highlighted some areas, adding more contrast because this will be now pulling out, and the color is very similar. So this is the, no, this is here. That's the color and that's the Tombow. So pencil and Tombow are very similar, but we're just creating a bit more depth. Next one I did, I think I've done the darker green, basically just kind of adding it in a few areas like so. And just blending them. Sometimes adding more color really does make a big difference. So now you can see this chartreuse kind of lifts things a little bit. After I've done that, again back in with the bit of water. Depending on the watercolor pencil, the pigment can sometimes become stronger and more vibrant. So I find that is particularly true when it comes to the Caran Museum Aquarelles. The water just wakes the whole thing up. Another thing I just realized I need to add is the Molotov just in the middle. I mean, I'm really hating this tip. It's so chunky and it's kind of, it's you can't do like cute dots anymore. The dots have, I'll show you a close-up. You can see these are perfect little dots, and these are kind of smudged a little bit. It's because of the nib already fraying, so I'm not too keen on that nib at all. So yeah, I wish I got this in the other size, not the 4mm. So that needs to be dried, and only then we can start adding colored pencils on top. The next step, like I said, are the colored pencils. So I've got a variety here, which are all swatched out here at the bottom. So 4 of these colors. We have got, let's see, so this is Holbein Mustard, then we have Holbein Olive Yellow, then we have Luminance Olive Yellow, and we have Green Ochre, also Luminance. So in that order. And now I was just looking at the actual pattern and see what you would like to bring out a bit more and what you would like to add to the illustration. And basically just remember that once you place a pencil, that is it. It's not going anywhere. So use it with that in mind, that with water-soluble things, you can just blend them, you can try to wipe them away or remove them, but you can't quite do that with the pencils. So here I'm just adding a little bit more detail, and that's it really. And that lightest color, that will go over. Just remember that Holbeins, it's hard to get over them. They create a waxy texture, which is then very difficult to blend if you like to press with your pencils, which I do. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so I think we will leave it at that. And then as the last step, I have used these 2 pencils for the darkest value, and they're these 2, Derwent Lightfast, Millard Green and Pine. So interestingly enough, the darkest is called Pine. So what I've done here first is just adding this slightly like tallow green type of color at the edge, and just adding little bits of this color throughout, keeping in mind that I will go in and darken it with this color. So that's the last color now. It's the darkest, and it's the one that immediately adds more contrast and finishes off the illustration nicely. Again, I have used a little bit too much of the Holbein pencils there, so it's preventing me from building up on the color and the texture. But you get the idea, so just play around with it, and then also pull the pencil. It needs to be relatively sharp, and just, you know, so you can pull out the lines. So essentially that's what I've done with this one. Now let's move on to here, which was a little bit more complicated, even though it looks like I used less products here. So with the next one, again, I started with the Tombows, and what I've done there is I have actually done a second layer of the chartreuse color. This is 133, and then I went at the bottom like so, immediately blending things. So you can see I'm pulling out the color, and it's important now to wait for it to dry for us to go in and do the next layer. Next, what we need to do is use watercolor pencils. So there's a number of things I did. I used this, what is it called? Green Ochre by Caran, and I just added it just on the side like that, just a line of it, and also some scribbly marks at the bottom, still revealing some of that Tombow sage color here, 228. Then I've used this color. I think with that color just sort of blended through and brought it in a bit more, and also went on the other side, and that's that. And then again I went in and I blended both of them in like so. I hope you can notice how it changes as we add every little bit of like paint or pencil. Again, needs to be dried, and then we're going to do the next color group. The next part is to add this middle part, and I actually here I've done it afterwards, so not in the beginning. So what I'm trying to do is create a shape there, like an oval, but still trying to keep the highlight of it, so not too big so that it would completely take the space of the highlight. You still want the highlight to be visible, if that makes sense. So once I've done that, I then could start highlighting things. So I've taken this dark color, which is the dark sap green, and I started adding it a little bit at the bottom. As you can see, it will create a nice pop. And then I've taken this turquoise color, which is light malachite green, and basically created a line going upwards and then going around and to the bottom, sort of like pulling it out. So what we want in essence is kind of like a structural line or a ridge, which I was inspired by these sort of ridges that we had in the Pinecone. So I decided to play with different colors but still use that ridge. So once we have this, I then would have to go in with, actually no, so first I need just a mix of the two. So that one was the beryl green, and again using a bit of water, you can see it just blends beautifully. Try not to pull the same dark color into this turquoisey, because we'll be still working on this lovely turquoise, and then I'm going to blend it from both ends so it doesn't look too strong of a line. And now last part that's left is basically two finishing touches with these two pencils, and in essence what they will do is they will provide depth like I did here. So I added that darkest, deepest tone. So without it, you can see it's not popping as much, so we will add a bit of that. And also I will lift this area ever so slightly, but it does make a difference. So this area is lifted with this juicy green color, which is a spring green by Luminance. And this one is the dark sap green, which is a Museum Aquarelle Pencil. So I'll see you in a second when this has dried up. So let's do the finishing touches now. We take the darkest color and we just add it right on the line of that gold detail, and I could potentially add a little bit more here just at the bottom and bring it up just to create depth and sort of light source from this side and a bit more shadowing on that side. And then we take this juicy green and we just do this little number, and you can see immediately it just becomes more fresh. So now of course we have to blend in the two colors like so, and we leave that bit of the deep dark sap green there, and it creates that lovely effect. So that is how you can build up your patterns and have fun with them. So of course this you then can take into illustrating something like flowers, but the idea is that you can just take it so much further with your own color palettes and having fun with it and exploring, seeing things, but putting them down on paper with how you see them rather than with what it actually is like. So that is it for today. I will see you soon. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. What else do you need to hit? Yeah, leave the comment what you thought of this and if you felt inspired to create something. I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.